The night Amelia found the child, Chicago was breathing in slow, cold sighs, the kind that sink into your bones and make you question every step you take. She didn't know then that her life was about to split cleanly into a before and an after. All she knew was that the wind cut through her thin coat, her feet ached from a double shift, and some sound, had stopped her in the middle of the sidewalk. It wasn't traffic, or laughter, or music from a passing car. It was a small, broken cry, the kind that doesn't ask for attention, but begs for survival. Before this story goes any further, take a second and subscribe, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a reminder that one choice, made by one tired person, can change an entire city. Amelia was 62 years old, a single grandmother who had learned long ago how to survive without applause. Her husband had died young, her daughter even younger, leaving Amelia with memories instead of family dinners. She worked nights at a 5-star restaurant downtown, the kind with crystal glasses, linen napkins, and menus that changed with the seasons. By day, she slept in a small apartment that smelled faintly of coffee and laundry soap. By night, she served people who never learned her name. She didn't complain. Life had taught her that dignity wasn't loud. It was quiet and stubborn. That night, she was walking home because she needed the money more than the bus ride. That's when she heard it again. A whimper, soft but desperate, echoing from a narrow alley between 2 brick buildings. Amelia stopped. Every sensible part of her said to keep walking. Chicago streets weren't gentle, especially after dark. But another part of her, the part that had buried too many loved ones, refused to move on. She followed the sound, her shoes crunching against gravel and trash, until she saw him. He was sitting on a flattened cardboard box, a tiny figure swallowed by an oversized hoodie. His cheeks were red from the cold, his eyes glassy with tears. He no longer had the strength to cry. 3 years old, maybe, alone, no adult, no blanket, no explanation. Amelia crouched slowly, her knees protesting, and spoke softly, afraid she might scare him away. He looked at her like the world had already taught him not to trust. That look broke something open inside her. She took off her scarf without thinking and wrapped it around his small shoulders. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from recognition. She knew that kind of loneliness. She'd lived it. When she asked his name, he didn't answer. When she asked where his parents were, he stared past her, silent. Amelia didn't call the police right away. She didn't walk away either. She did what grandmothers have done for centuries when the world fails a child. She stayed. That night, she brought him home. She warmed soup, wrapped him in a towel fresh from the dryer, and let him fall asleep on her couch while she sat on the floor beside him, watching his chest rise and fall. She told herself it was temporary, just until morning, just until the right people could take over. But morning came, and something in her heart refused to let go. Over the following weeks, the system moved slowly, as it always did. Papers, interviews, waiting rooms. Amelia filled out forms with aching hands and signed her name where it mattered most. Raising a 3-year-old at her age wasn't heroic. It was exhausting. She worked longer hours, slept less, and learned how to stretch meals meant for one into meals for two. The boy, she named him Leo, followed her like a shadow, his laughter slowly replacing the silence that had once filled her apartment. She read him stories at night, her voice cracking with emotion she didn't bother to hide. Love, she learned, doesn't ask if you're ready. Months later, on a night that would test everything she believed, Amelia served a man everyone else recognized instantly. He wore wealth like armor, tailored suit, expensive watch, eyes that scanned the room as if pricing it. The billionaire ordered without looking at her, barely acknowledging her presence. She did her job the way she always did, polite, attentive, invisible. When the bill came, he signed it quickly and left. Amelia cleared the table and felt her chest tighten. The tip line read $0. It shouldn't have hurt. She was used to being overlooked. But that night, it stung differently. As she lifted the plate, something slipped out and landed softly on the table. A folded note. Amelia hesitated, then opened it. What she read would ripple far beyond that restaurant, beyond her quiet life, and into the heart of the city itself. The note was heavier than paper had any right to be. Amelia stood frozen for a moment, the noise of the dining room fading into a dull hum behind her. Inside, written in sharp, confident strokes, were words that made her breath catch. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an explanation. It was a single sentence that felt like a verdict passed down by someone who had never wondered if the heat would stay on through winter. He had written that tipping was a reward for excellence, and that tonight, excellence had not been earned. Beneath that, something else caught her eye. A second fold. A business card, thick and pristine, with a name known across the city and a private phone number scrawled on the back. Amelia's first instinct was to crumble it and throw it away. Pride surged up, hot and familiar. She had survived loss, poverty, and loneliness. She didn't need validation from a man who couldn't see her. But something stopped her. Not curiosity, not greed. It was exhaustion. The kind that settles into your bones and whispers that you cannot afford to ignore anything that might help the child sleeping in your apartment. She tucked the card into her apron pocket and finished her shift with the same steady hands she always used, though inside, her thoughts were unraveling. When she got home, Leo was asleep on the couch, curled around the stuffed bear a neighbor had given him. Amelia watched him for a long time. The lines on her face softened as she brushed his hair back gently. She thought about the note again, about the word excellence, and wondered how someone who had everything could understand so little. Excellence, she thought, was standing on your feet for 10 hours straight so a child could eat. Excellence was choosing love when walking away would be easier. The next morning, she nearly forgot about the card. Breakfast was spilled milk and laughter, mismatched socks, and a rush to get Leo to daycare before her shift. It wasn't until she reached into her purse for her keys and felt the stiff edge of paper that her chest tightened again. She didn't call right away. It took 3 days of arguing with herself before she finally dialed the number during her lunch break. Her hands trembling so badly she had to sit down. The voice on the other end was calm, efficient, and completely unprepared for Amelia. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She simply told her story about finding a child on the street, about raising him on a waitress's salary, about the note. There was a pause so long she thought the call had dropped. Then the voice asked questions. Not about the restaurant, not about the service, about her life, about Leo, about how she managed. What Amelia didn't know was that the call was being recorded. Not for scandal, but for memory. The billionaire had a habit of documenting moments that challenged him, He listened from his office. As Amelia spoke, her voice steady but worn. Something in her words unsettled him. Not guilt, recognition. He had grown up poor too, though no one remembered that part of his story anymore. He ended the call by asking if he could meet her. Amelia almost said no. Almost. But Leo needed shoes and rent was due, and life rarely gave room for almost. They met in a small cafe, far from cameras and chandeliers. He looked different in daylight, less imposing, more human. He apologized, though the words seemed unfamiliar on his tongue. He told her he wanted to help. Amelia listened, arms crossed, heart guarded. When he offered money, she shook her head. "If you want to help," she said quietly, "help me keep doing what I'm doing." The simplicity of it stunned him. Weeks passed. Amelia returned to her routines, uncertain if anything would come of that meeting. Then something did. A letter arrived from the city, informing her that funding had been approved for a new childcare initiative in her neighborhood. Then another, confirming a grant for single grandparents raising orphan children. Her name wasn't mentioned anywhere publicly, but she knew. The city knew too, eventually. Journalists started asking questions. How did a program like this appear overnight? Who pushed it through? The story broke slowly, then all at once. A single grandmother, a billionaire, a $0 tip. The city was divided. Some called it charity, others called it redemption. Amelia ignored the noise. She was busy teaching Leo how to tie his shoes, how to say please and thank you, how to believe the world could be kind, even when it wasn't. One evening, months later, she found another note under a plate at the restaurant. This one wasn't from him. It was from a couple who had overheard her story somewhere along the way. Inside was a modest tip and a handwritten message thanking her for reminding them what dignity looked like. Amelia smiled, a small, tired smile that held an entire lifetime inside it. She went home that night and hugged Leo tighter than usual. She didn't tell him about billionaires or notes or citywide debates. She told him he was loved. That was the only legacy she cared about. And somewhere in Chicago, a man who once left nothing but a zero began funding something far more difficult than money. Change. The attention didn't arrive gently. It came in waves, crashing into Amelia's quiet life with a force she had never prepared for. Reporters waited outside the restaurant after her shifts, cameras flashing as if she were someone important. Neighbors she barely knew suddenly smiled too brightly, asking questions that felt more like inspections. Amelia hated it. She had lived most of her life unnoticed, and now that the city had found her, it felt less like honor and more like exposure. Still, every time she considered stepping away, she looked at Leo and reminded herself why she endured it. Leo was changing fast. The boy who once flinched at sudden noises now ran through the apartment laughing, his small feet pounding across the worn carpet. He asked questions constantly, about clouds, about why the moon followed them at night, about whether his mother would come back someday. Those questions hurt in places Amelia didn't know still ached. She answered them honestly but gently, careful never to let her own sorrow become his burden. She told him that some people leave because they're broken, not because the child isn't worth staying for. Money helped, of course. The grants eased the tightest pressures. Amelia could buy fresh fruit without calculating every penny. She could replace Leo's shoes before they wore through at the soles. But what surprised her most was how quickly people assumed her life must now be easy, as if a few checks could erase decades of loss, as if being seen meant being healed. The truth was quieter. Amelia still woke up tired. She still worked double shifts, She still counted blessings one by one. One afternoon, the billionaire showed up at the restaurant again. This time, he didn't sit in the best section or order the most expensive wine. He asked for Amelia's table. When she saw him, her stomach tightened, not with fear, but with resolve. She served him like any other guest. No special treatment, no bitterness. At the end of the meal, he left a generous tip. But that wasn't what mattered. Under the plate was another note. This one simply said, "Thank you for trusting me enough to say no." Amelia took the note home and placed it in a drawer she kept for important things. Birth certificates, old photographs, a lock of her daughter's hair. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was peace. She didn't need him to be better. She needed the world to be kinder to people like Leo. If his money helped do that, she would accept it without apology. As the months passed, Amelia began speaking at community centers, then schools. She didn't prepare speeches. She just told the truth. About how close she had come to walking past that alley. About how fear and compassion had wrestled inside her chest. About how love didn't arrive with guarantees. People listened. Some cried. Others looked uncomfortable, but they listened. That mattered. Leo attended his first day of kindergarten, holding Amelia's hand so tightly her fingers went numb. When he finally let go and ran toward his classroom, she felt a rush of pride so sharp it nearly brought her to her knees. She sat alone in the hallway afterward, letting the quiet settle, realizing that this was what she had fought for. Not headlines, not recognition, a future. The city eventually moved on, as cities do. Another story replaced hers. Another outrage, another miracle. Amelia welcomed the silence back. She returned to being just a waitress, just a grandmother, just a woman doing her best. But something had shifted. Strangers were gentler now. Tips came with eye contact. People said her name. One night, walking home from work, Amelia passed the same alley where she had found Leo years earlier. She stopped and listened. There were no cries this time, just the hum of traffic and the distant echo of laughter. She breathed out slowly, a prayer she didn't put into words. The world was still broken. Children were still alone. But one wasn't. And that mattered more than she could ever explain. At home, Leo was sprawled on the floor, drawing pictures of superheroes. He looked up and grinned, missing tooth and all. "I made you one," he said, holding up a drawing of a woman with gray hair and a cape. Amelia laughed, the sound surprising even herself. She taped the picture to the fridge like it was a masterpiece. That night, after Leo fell asleep, Amelia sat by the window and watched the city lights flicker. She thought about how close she had come to believing her life was over, that usefulness had an expiration date. She knew better now. Purpose doesn't retire. Love doesn't age out. And sometimes the smallest act, stopping, listening, staying, can echo louder than any fortune. Years passed in a way that felt both slow and impossibly fast. Leo grew taller, his voice deeper, his questions more complex. Amelia watched him become someone she could never have imagined on that cold Chicago night. He was kind in ways that mattered. He noticed when others were left out. He shared without being asked. When Amelia wondered if she had done enough, she saw herself reflected in those choices and felt something close to certainty. Her body, however, reminded her daily of her age. Long shifts left her knees aching, her back stiff. There were mornings when she sat at the edge of the bed, bracing herself before standing, telling her reflection that she could make it through one more day. She never told Leo how hard it was. He had already lost enough She wanted his memories to be warm, not weighted. The billionaire stayed mostly out of her life, exactly as she preferred. Occasionally, a program would expand, a scholarship would appear, a shelter would receive funding, and Amelia would know where it came from. There were no public acknowledgments, no press releases bearing her name. That felt right. She had never wanted to be a symbol. She wanted to be a home. One winter evening, Leo came home quiet. Amelia noticed immediately. Silence had taught her to listen more closely than words ever could. After dinner, he finally spoke. A classmate had asked him why his grandmother was so old, why he didn't have parents like everyone else. The question wasn't cruel, just careless, but it landed hard. Amelia waited, letting him find his own words. When he asked if something was wrong with him, her heart broke in a way that felt new. She took his hands in hers, her skin thin and lined against his young warmth. She told him the truth she had learned the hard way. Families aren't defined by how they begin, but by how they choose each other. She told him he wasn't missing anything that mattered. He was loved. He was wanted. He belonged. Leo cried quietly, the kind of cry that empties something heavy. Amelia held him until sleep came. At school, Leo began volunteering without telling her at first. He helped younger kids with reading. He sat with the boy who always ate alone. When Amelia eventually found out, she didn't scold him for keeping secrets. She hugged him and thought about how pain, when met with love, could become generosity instead of bitterness. The restaurant changed owners. New management brought new rules, new faces. Amelia worried she would be pushed out, deemed too slow, too old. Instead, a young manager asked her to stay on as a mentor. She laughed at the word, mentor, but she accepted. Teaching others how to carry themselves with dignity felt like passing something forward. One night, after closing, a young waitress asked Amelia why she always smiled, even when customers were rude. Amelia thought for a moment. Because, she said, you never know who's watching you decide who you are. The words surprised her. They felt true. Leo graduated high school with honors. Amelia sat in the audience, hands shaking, tears streaming freely down her face. When his name was called, he scanned the crowd until he found her. He waved, grinning, and in that instant, every sacrifice crystallized into meaning. This was why she had kept going. This was the reward no tip could match. After the ceremony, Leo handed her a folded piece of paper. Inside was a letter he had written. He thanked her for choosing him, for not walking away, for showing him that strength could be gentle. Amelia couldn't read it aloud. She pressed it to her chest instead and nodded, trusting him to understand. That night, as fireworks burst somewhere over the city, Amelia sat on the balcony and watched the lights. She thought about time, how little of it she had left, and how full it felt anyway. She didn't know what the future held for Leo, but she knew he would face it with a heart shaped by love, not abandonment. Chicago continued to roar around them, indifferent and beautiful. Amelia had learned that changing the world didn't always look like grand gestures. Sometimes it looked like staying, like listening, like raising a child the world had forgotten and proving quietly that he was unforgettable. Time softened some edges and sharpened others. Amelia retired from the restaurant the year her hands began to tremble just enough to make carrying full trays risky. The goodbye party was small but sincere. People she had trained, served beside, and quietly influenced hugged her like family. Someone handed her a card filled with notes, each one thanking her for lessons she never realized she was teaching. She went home that night feeling lighter, not because work was over, but because she had left something meaningful behind. Retirement didn't mean rest. Amelia filled her days volunteering at the same community centers, where she once spoke hesitantly into borrowed microphones. Now, her voice was calm, steady, seasoned by experience. She helped new single parents navigate paperwork, listened to grandparents overwhelmed by second chances they never expected to have, and rocked babies while their caregivers took a moment to breathe. She never told them she was strong. She showed them what strength looked like when it was quiet. Leo went off to college on a scholarship he had earned through equal parts discipline and compassion. Amelia cried the entire train ride home after dropping him off. The apartment felt enormous without his presence, every sound echoing. That first night alone, she set 2 plates out of habit, then laughed softly at herself and put one away. Love, she realized, leaves ghosts everywhere, but they aren't painful, they're proof. Leo called every Sunday. Sometimes he talked about classes, sometimes about nothing at all. He told her about a professor who reminded him of her, about friends who didn't understand why he always went home during breaks. Amelia listened, asked questions, and reminded him to eat properly. She never told him how much she missed him. She didn't want to anchor him to her loneliness. She wanted him free. One spring, Amelia received an invitation she hadn't expected. A city-wide event honoring community impact. Her name was on it. She tried to decline. Public recognition still made her uncomfortable. But Leo insisted. "You always showed up for me," he said. "Let me show up for you." So she went. The hall was full, bright, overwhelming. Speeches blurred together until her name was called. As she walked to the stage, her knees shook, not from age, but from disbelief. She looked out and saw Leo standing, clapping harder than anyone else. She spoke briefly. She thanked people. She said that help should never come with conditions, and love should never require permission. The room stood when she finished. Amelia felt something release inside her. Not pride. Closure. After the event, a familiar face approached. Older now, grayer, less guarded. The billionaire didn't say much. He simply told her that meeting her had changed the way he measured success. That he funded programs now without needing his name attached. That he listened more. Amelia nodded. She didn't need his transformation to validate her own life, but she accepted the truth of it. People could change. She had seen it happen in 1,000 small ways. Years later, Amelia's health began to fade gently, like a light dimmed slowly, so the dark wouldn't shock anyone. Leo moved back to Chicago. He cooked meals, managed medications, and sat beside her during long afternoons filled with quiet. Roles reversed naturally. Amelia watched him care for her with the same patience she had given him. There was no regret in her heart, only gratitude. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the room gold, Leo asked her if she had ever regretted stopping that night in the alley. Amelia smiled, the lines on her face deep and earned. She told him the truth, that she had been afraid, that she had doubted herself, that she had wondered if she was enough. And then she told him that every beautiful thing in her life had come from choosing love despite those fears. When Amelia passed, it was quietly, peacefully, with Leo holding her hand. The city marked her death with a short article. A former waitress, a community advocate, a grandmother. Leo knew those words weren't enough. He carried her real story with him, in the way he lived, in the way he treated people others overlooked. At her memorial, the room overflowed. People shared stories Amelia had never told, of advice given in hallways, of meals paid for anonymously, of moments where someone felt seen for the first time. Leo listened, heart full, understanding at last the scope of the life she had lived. Long after, Chicago kept moving. Streets stayed loud, winter stayed cold, but in one small way, the city was different, kinder, because one tired woman had stopped walking, because she had chosen to stay, because she had loved without asking what it would cost. Leo carried Amelia's memory with him into everything he did, not as a weight, but as a compass. After the memorial, life didn't pause to let him grieve properly. It never does. He returned to work, to crowded trains and busy sidewalks, to conversations that felt too ordinary for the enormity of what he had lost. Yet, in quiet moments, he felt her presence clearly, guiding him the way it always had. He moved into a small apartment not far from the alley where his life had begun. At first, the proximity felt unbearable. Every brick wall, every flickering streetlight pulled him backward. But over time, it began to feel intentional, like a promise kept. He volunteered at the same community center where Amelia had spent her retirement years. At first, people recognized his last name and offered sympathy. Later, they recognized his consistency. That mattered more to him. Leo chose a career in social work, not because it was easy or noble, but because it felt honest. He had lived the systems others only studied. He knew how paperwork could delay hope, how one overlooked form could decide a child's future. He fought quietly, persistently, the way Amelia had taught him. He listened more than he spoke. He learned names. He stayed late. Every year, on the anniversary of the night Amelia found him, Leo walked the streets of Chicago alone. He never told anyone where he went. He stood in that alley, now cleaner, better lit, and imagined the woman she had been then, tired, grieving, unsure. He wondered how close the world had come to losing him, and how close she had come to believing she didn't matter anymore. The thought humbled him every time. The billionaire's influence still rippled through the city, though few remembered the origin. Shelters expanded. Emergency childcare funding stabilized. Programs that once struggled quietly endured. Leo knew the truth behind it all, but he never corrected anyone. Amelia had taught him that credit was a distraction. Impact was the point. Years later, Leo was invited to speak at a university. The topic was resilience. He stood at the podium, heart pounding, and told his story without embellishment. He spoke of a grandmother who worked nights and loved fiercely. He spoke of how humiliation could become a doorway instead of an ending. The room was silent when he finished. Afterward, students approached him with tears in their eyes, asking how they could help someone, anyone, the way Amelia had helped him. Leo smiled. The answer was simple and impossibly hard. You stop, you listen, you stay. One winter, during a particularly harsh season, Leo found a small child sitting alone at a bus stop, bundled but shivering. The moment mirrored his own beginning so sharply it stole his breath. He knelt, spoke gently, waited. Help arrived. The child was reunited with a frantic parent minutes later. Leo walked home afterward, hands shaking, heart racing. He realized then that Amelia's story wasn't just his past, it was his responsibility. He began funding a modest emergency fund using his own savings, supplemented quietly by donors who trusted him. It wasn't named after Amelia. It wasn't named at all. It simply existed, ready to act when time mattered more than protocol. When asked why he did it, Leo always answered the same way. Because someone once did that for me. On the anniversary of Amelia's passing, Leo visited the restaurant where she had worked for so many years. It had changed names, decor, ownership. No one there remembered her. He ordered a simple meal and sat quietly, absorbing the hum of conversation, the clink of silverware. When the check came, he tipped generously. Under the plate, he left a note. It read, "You matter more than you know." He walked out without looking back. Chicago continued to evolve, as cities do. Buildings rose, neighborhoods shifted. Stories were forgotten. But Amelia's legacy lived on in ways no headline could capture. In every child who slept warm because someone acted quickly. In every caregiver who felt seen instead of judged. In every moment, Leo chose compassion over convenience. Late one evening, Leo stood by his window, watching the city lights flicker, just as Amelia once had. He thought about how one choice could ripple across decades, shaping lives unseen. He understood now what she had known all along, that love, once given freely, never really leaves. It changes hands, it changes form, but it endures. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between people, between moments, Amelia's story kept working, quietly reminding the world that the smallest kindness, offered at the right time, could outlast wealth, fame, and even life itself. Leo often wondered how many lives brushed past each other without ever truly meeting. Standing at his kitchen window, years later, watching snow fall softly over Chicago, he felt the answer settle gently in his chest. Most lives passed like strangers on a platform, close enough to touch, yet moving on different tracks. Amelia had been the rare kind who stepped across, who crossed lines others pretended not to see. He kept her apartment much the same. The furniture had been updated, the walls repainted, but certain things never moved. The chair by the window. The small table where she used to fold laundry while telling stories about people she met at work. The drawer that once held notes and documents now held letters Leo received from families he helped. Thank yous, updates, photographs of children growing safer, stronger, older. He understood now why she had saved things like that. Proof mattered, not for pride, but for endurance. On difficult days, when bureaucracy stalled progress or a case ended badly despite his best efforts, Leo imagined Amelia's voice. Not loud, not commanding, just steady. She would remind him that outcomes were not always the measure of worth, that showing up mattered, even when success didn't follow. That lesson kept him grounded when frustration threatened to harden him. One evening, Leo was invited to dinner at a private residence overlooking the city. He almost declined when he saw the name on the invitation. The billionaire. Years had passed since their paths last crossed directly. Curiosity and a quiet sense of closure drew him there. The home was elegant, restrained, nothing like the excess Leo had imagined. They spoke over a simple meal. No reporters, no speeches. Just two people, shaped by the same woman in different ways. The man told Leo that Amelia had been the only person who had ever refused his help without bitterness. That her refusal had forced him to examine motives he had never questioned. He said her influence had outlasted any investment he had ever made. Leo listened politely, then said something he had never said before. She didn't want to change you, he said. She just wanted you to see. The man nodded, eyes downcast, and for the first time, looked truly small. When Leo left that night, he walked instead of taking a car. He passed the restaurant, now closed for renovations, its windows dark. He paused, imagining Amelia inside, moving between tables, unseen and essential. He whispered thank you into the cold air, not expecting an answer. Years later, Leo stood in that same alley again, this time with a small plaque newly mounted on the brick wall. It didn't mention billionaires or tips or viral stories. It simply read, "In this place, a life was chosen." Beneath it was a smaller line, "Kindness changes directions." Leo hadn't arranged it. The city had. He smiled, knowing Amelia would have protested the attention, then secretly appreciated the simplicity of it. Children passed by without noticing the plaque. That felt right. The story wasn't meant to trap anyone in the past. It was meant to move forward. Leo watched one child tug at her grandmother's hand, laughing, and felt something complete itself inside him. As he grew older, Leo became known for his patience, his unwillingness to rush decisions that involved human lives. Younger colleagues sometimes mistook it for softness. They learned quickly it was strength of a rarer kind. When asked where it came from, he never launched into long explanations. He simply said he was raised by someone who believed no one was disposable. On the anniversary of Amelia's birthday each year, Leo cooked one of her old recipes and invited friends, colleagues, neighbors. He told stories about her stubbornness, her humor, her quiet defiance of despair. People laughed, cried, and left feeling lighter. That, he believed, was how legacies were meant to function, not as monuments, but as gatherings. Near the end of his own life, Leo wrote a letter meant to be opened long after he was gone. In it, he told the story again, not as a headline, but as a chain of choices. A tired woman, a crying child, a decision to stop. He wrote that the world would always offer reasons to look away, and that courage often arrived disguised as inconvenience. He hoped whoever read it would recognize the moment when it came. Chicago kept breathing, just as it had the night Amelia found him. Cold winds, bright summers, endless movement. Millions of stories overlapping, unnoticed. But threaded through it all was one quiet truth that refused to disappear. That love offered without expectation could outlive wealth. That dignity could be practiced by anyone, anywhere. That a single grandmother walking home from work could alter the future simply by choosing to stay. And somewhere, in the spaces where people hesitated before walking on, Amelia's influence lingered. In the pause, in the turn back, in the hand extended instead of withdrawn. Not because her story was famous, but because it was human. Because it reminded the city, and anyone willing to listen, that even the smallest lives, when met with compassion, could change everything.